doctor's office smelled like antiseptic and old magazines. I sat in the chair across from Dr. Haynes with my hands folded in my lap, trying to look like a woman who had nothing to hide. I was 53 years old. I had been trying to look like that for 22 years. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, glancing at his screen, "your blood work came back mostly clean. Cholesterol's a little high, but nothing alarming." He paused. "I do want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." I nodded. "Your bone density results suggest long-term chronic stress, not just recent stress. We're talking years, possibly decades." He looked at me over his glasses. "Is everything okay at home?" I opened my mouth, closed it, and then something inside me that I had been holding shut for 22 years just cracked open. I started crying in a way I hadn't cried since I was 31 years old, sitting in my car outside a pharmacy, staring at a pregnancy test that was about to end my marriage before I even had the courage to admit what I'd done. I need to go back. I need to go all the way back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense unless you understand who I was before I became this version of myself. The one who learned to smile at breakfast and disappear by dinner. I grew up in a small town in western Pennsylvania, the kind of place where everyone knows your name and your business and your grandmother's business. My mother worked at the school district office. My father drove trucks long haul. I was the good girl. Straight A's. Church on Sundays. I went to Penn State on a partial scholarship and studied education because teaching felt safe and purposeful, and I was good at it. I met my husband at a friend's birthday party in my junior year. His name was Gregory. Greg. He was a year older, studying mechanical engineering, and he had this way of listening to you like you were the only person in the room. Not in a performative way, just genuinely still. I wasn't used to that. I grew up in a house where everyone was always moving, always busy, always somewhere else. We dated for 3 years. He was steady and patient and kind in a way that felt almost unfamiliar to me. When he proposed on the back porch of his parents' house in Harrisburg, I said yes before he finished the sentence. We were supposed to get married the following June. The thing that happened, I don't have a clean way to say it. I've rehearsed it in my head 10,000 times and it never comes out clean. 4 months before the wedding, I went to a work happy hour. I was student teaching at the time, and the full-time teachers had taken us out to celebrate the end of the semester. I drank more than I intended to. There was a man there, a gym teacher, older than me, someone I barely knew. I don't remember all of it. I remember laughing too hard at something that wasn't funny. I remember the parking lot. I remember waking up in my car and not knowing exactly how I got there. I drove home. I showered. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself it wouldn't matter. I told myself Greg would never know. 6 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. Greg and I had been intimate, but not often. We were long distance for part of that semester, and the last time we'd been together was nearly 2 months before the happy hour. I sat in my car in a parking lot of a Walgreens and did the math over and over and over, hoping the numbers would change. They didn't. I thought about telling him. I thought about it every single day for 3 weeks. I thought about it while I helped my mother address wedding invitations. I thought about it while I stood in the bridal shop and watched her cry because I looked beautiful in a dress I felt I didn't deserve. I thought about it at night while Greg called me from Pittsburgh and told me he couldn't wait to start our life together. I didn't tell him. I convinced myself that the baby could be Greg's, that I was being paranoid, that the timeline wasn't as clear as I thought. I walked myself down the aisle on a Saturday in June, and I smiled the whole way, and I told myself that this was my family now and I would protect it no matter what. Our daughter was born 7 months after the wedding. We told everyone she was premature. She wasn't. Her name is Lily. She is 22 years old now, and she has her grandfather's eyes and a laugh that fills up every room she walks into. She is the best thing in my life. She has always been the best thing in my life, and for a long time I used that to justify everything. Greg found out when Lily was 4 months old. I never learned exactly how. He never told me. One night he came home from work and sat down at the kitchen table and looked at me across the room for a long moment without saying anything. Lily was asleep in the bassinet. The dinner I'd made was getting cold. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to tell me the truth." I knew. Immediately. The way you know when the ground shifts under you. He asked me about Lily. He asked me if she was his. I could have lied. I had lied for almost a year. I was good at it by then, but something about the way he was looking at me, not with anger, which I had braced for, but with this terrible quiet, made lying feel impossible, like trying to hold water in your hands. I told him the truth. All of it. The happy hour. The parking lot. The math I'd done in that Walgreens parking lot. How I told myself it could still be his. How I'd walked down that aisle anyway. He sat there and listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, "Okay." Just that. Okay. He got up, took his plate to the sink, rinsed it off, and went to bed. I sat at that kitchen table until 2 a.m, waiting for something, yelling, crying, questions, anything. Nothing came. That was the last real conversation we had for 22 years. I want you to understand what I mean when I say that, because people here, he gave me the silent treatment and they imagine something petty. Sulking, a cold shoulder for a few days. That is not what this was. Greg never left. He never asked for a divorce. He went to work every morning and came home every evening. He attended Lily's school plays and her soccer games and her high school graduation. He mowed the lawn on Saturdays. He fixed the dishwasher when it broke. He exchanged pleasantries with our neighbors and shook hands at church and to everyone who saw us. We were a normie family. But he never touched me again. Not once. Not a hand on my shoulder. Not a brush of fingers passing the salt. We slept in the same bed for the first 2 years. I don't know why, inertia maybe. And then he moved to the guest room and we both pretended that was normal too. He spoke to me when it was necessary. About logistics. About Lily. About the water heater or the electric bill, or whose turn it was to pick her up from school. He was never cruel. He never raised his voice. He was just absent, like he had gone somewhere inside himself that I didn't have access to anymore, and the man who came to dinner every night was just the part of him he left behind to keep things running. I used to think the silence would break eventually, that he would either forgive me or leave, and either outcome would be better than this. But months turned into years and the silence just became the architecture of our life. We built everything around it without ever talking about it. Lily grew up in it without knowing what it was. She thought we were quiet people. She used to tell her friends her parents were calm. I didn't know whether to laugh or weep. There were moments when I almost told her. When she was 16 and going through her first heartbreak, crying at the kitchen table while I rubbed her back, she said, "Mum, how do you and Dad make it work? You've been together so long." I held her and told her that love was complicated. That was the most honest thing I'd said in 15 years. When she was in college, she took a psychology class and came home for Thanksgiving full of theories about attachment and communication and relationships. She sat across from Greg at the dinner table and said, "Studies show that couples who don't fight actually have less intimacy than ones who do." She was trying to be interesting. She didn't know she was describing us with clinical precision. Greg looked up from his turkey and said, "Is that right?" Then he looked at me for exactly 1 second, and then he looked back down at his plate. That 1 second, 22 years of that 1 second, over and over. I started going to therapy in my mid-40s. I told the therapist everything, the affair, the pregnancy, the years of silence. She asked me why I'd never pushed for a resolution, why I hadn't demanded a conversation or counseling or a divorce. I told her I didn't feel like I had the right. She said that wasn't a reason. It was a punishment I was administering to myself on his behalf. I thought about that for a long time. She wasn't wrong. But she also didn't understand that by then the silence had become something I depended on. It was the evidence of what I'd done. It was the shape of my guilt. If it ended, if he forgave me or left me, I would have to figure out who I was without it, and I wasn't sure I knew how to do that. Lily got engaged 2 years ago. His name is Marcus. He's from Atlanta originally, works in logistics, coaches youth baseball on weekends. He's one of those people who is immediately warm with everyone, the kind of man who remembers the names of your friends' dogs. She was so happy, is so happy. I have never in my life been more grateful to watch someone be happy. The engagement party was at our house. Greg and I stood side by side in the backyard greeting people, and I watched him hug Lily and shake Marcus's hand and make small talk with Marcus's parents from Georgia, And I thought, he is a good man. He has always been a good man. That was the thing I had broken. That was what I'd taken from both of us. A few months before the wedding, Lily asked me if Greg and I were okay. We were sitting in her apartment helping her address invitations. The same thing I'd done with my mother 26 years earlier, and she looked up from the table and said, "You two seem like you're just going through the motions sometimes, like your roommates." I told her we were just tired, that after 30-something years together, things get quieter. Normal. She looked at me for a moment like she didn't fully believe me. Then she said, "I just want you both to be happy, Mum. Not just functional, actually happy." I drove home that night and sat in the driveway for 45 minutes before I went inside. Which brings me back to Dr. Haynes' office. After Greg retired last spring, his company offered a comprehensive post-retirement health screening, the kind big engineering firms give their long-timers as a send-off. Full blood work, imaging, cardiac stress test, everything. His HR coordinator called me by mistake trying to schedule it and ended up on the phone with me for 10 minutes, and in that conversation she mentioned, casually, that Greg had requested a paternity test through their employee health program 18 months ago. I didn't say anything. I thanked her for the call. I hung up. I sat on the kitchen floor for a while. He had known. Officially, documented, irrefutably. For 18 months he had known what I had suspected, but never confirmed that Lily was not biologically his, and he had still walked her down the aisle, had still cried at her wedding, had still slow danced with her to My Girl in front of 140 people. I went to my own appointment that week because my hands wouldn't stop shaking and I needed someone to tell me I wasn't having a heart attack. That's how I ended up in Dr. Haynes' office, failing to hold it together in front of a man I'd met 4 times in my life. He handed me tissues. He was kind about it, the way doctors sometimes are when they understand they've accidentally opened something they didn't intend to open. I told him I was fine. I said I was just tired. He said, "You don't have to be fine right now." And that was when I completely fell apart. I came home that afternoon and Greg was in the kitchen making coffee. He does that in the afternoons now that he's retired, stands at the counter and makes a fresh pot around 3 o'clock, which I used to find irritating because it meant he'd be up past midnight, but I'd stopped saying anything about it years ago. I put my bag down on the table. He didn't turn around. "I know you got the paternity test," I said. The coffee maker kept going. He didn't move. "I know you've known for 18 months. My voice was steadier than I expected. I need to know, I need you to tell me why you stayed. After all of this, why?" He turned around then. He leaned back against the counter with his arms crossed, and he looked at me the way he'd looked at me that night, 22 years ago at the kitchen table. That terrible quiet. "Because she's my daughter," he said. "Whatever else she is my daughter." "She knows," I said. "Lily knows. I told her last month. She wanted to know the truth and I owed her that." Something moved across his face that I couldn't fully read. Pain, maybe, or relief, maybe both. "How did she take it?" he asked. "She cried. She was angry. She's still angry." I paused. "She asked if you knew." He looked at the floor. "She's going to want to talk to you," I said. He nodded slowly. "I know." We stood there in the kitchen for a minute, the coffee maker finishing its cycle, the afternoon light coming through the window above the sink. It was the longest real conversation we had had in 2 decades. We were both just standing in it, not quite knowing what to do next. "Greg," I said, "I am so sorry. I know there's no version of sorry that's big enough, but I've been sorry every single day. I need you to know that." He looked at me for a long moment. "I know you are," he said, and his voice was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "I've always known that. Is that why you stayed?" He was quiet for a beat. "Partly." He looked out the window. "And partly because I didn't know how to leave without taking everything apart. And partly because I was angry enough to want you to live with what you did." He stopped. "That last one isn't something I'm proud of." I had not expected him to say that. I had not expected honesty after all this time. And it hit me harder than any version of yelling ever could have. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," I said. "I know. But I'm asking you, whatever you decide, I'm asking you to stop punishing yourself too, because that's what this has been. For both of us. He didn't answer. He turned back to the counter, poured himself a cup of coffee, and stood there looking at it. I picked up my bag and went upstairs. That was 3 months ago. A lot has happened in 3 months. Lily came home for a weekend and sat across from Greg at the kitchen table, and the two of them talked for 4 hours while I made myself scarce in the backyard. I don't know everything they said. I know she cried, and I know he cried, which is something I have not seen him do in over 2 decades. She texted me afterward and said she needed time. I told her to take all the time she needed and that I loved her no matter what. She didn't respond to that part. I'm still waiting. Greg and I started seeing a marriage counselor. That is not a sentence I expected to write. The first session, the therapist asked us why we were there now after so long, and Greg said, "Because my daughter is starting her own family, and I don't want her to learn that silence is what love looks like." I sat next to him and didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "Same. We're not okay. I want to be honest about that. You don't spend 22 years building a life on a crack in the foundation and fix it in 3 months of Tuesday afternoons in a beige office. But something has shifted. There are conversations happening now. Real ones. Uncomfortable ones. The kind we should have had in that kitchen 2 decades ago. Last week we sat on the back porch after dinner, something we haven't done together since Lily was in elementary school, and we didn't talk much. Just sat there while it got dark. At some point he said, "The hydrangeas need to be cut back." I said I knew. We sat there a little longer. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. But it was 2 people sitting in the same space without one of them trying to disappear. And after 22 years, I'll take it. I don't tell this story because I want sympathy. I want to be clear about that. What I did was wrong. The affair, the lie, the years of letting him raise a child without the truth, all of it was wrong, and I own that without qualification. There is no version of this story where I am the victim. But I also think there's something in here worth saying out loud, which is this. Silence is not strength. It can feel like it. It can feel like control, like dignity, like punishment that fits the crime. But it is a slow poison. It poisons the person who drinks it, and it poisons everyone in the room with them, including the children who grow up breathing the air of it, and learning that this is what love looks like when it runs out of words. If you are living inside a silence, whether you're the one who caused it or the one who chose it, I'm not saying forgive, I'm not saying stay. I'm saying say the thing, whatever the thing is. The conversation you've been putting off for a month or a year or 2 decades, start it, even if it goes badly, even if there's no clean ending on the other side. The crack doesn't go away just because no one's talking about it. I know that now. I've known it for 22 years. I just finally ran out of ways to pretend I didn't. I've spent a lot of time thinking about cause and effect, not in any grand cosmic sense, just the simple, unglamorous mechanics of it. You do a thing, the thing has a weight. The weight doesn't disappear just because you stop looking at it. I made a choice when I was 29 years old, and then I made another choice to hide it, and then I made 22 years of small daily choices to keep hiding it, to smile at breakfast, to answer logistics questions about the water heater, to stand next to Gregory at Lily's graduation and let people assume we were a normal family. Every one of those choices had a consequence. Not a dramatic one, just a slow, steady accumulation, like water damage inside a wall. You can't see it from the outside, but it's always working. What I understand now, in a way I couldn't have at 30, is that intelligence isn't just about knowing things, it's about being honest about what you know. I knew what I had done. I knew what they had done. I knew what the timeline meant. I knew what the timeline meant. I knew, on some level, that Gregory deserved the truth. And I talked myself out of it, told myself a story where protecting him meant protecting myself, where staying silent was a kindness instead of a cowardice. That's not wisdom. That's the mind working against itself. Real intelligence is being able to look at something clearly, even when looking at it costs you something. Gregory had his own version of this. He knew, officially, documented, for 18 months before anything broke open. He chose silence too, but for different reasons. To protect Lily. To punish me. To avoid dismantling something he didn't know how to rebuild. I'm not excusing it. But I understand it. Two people, both intelligent in their own ways, both using that intelligence to avoid the one conversation that might have saved them 20 years of slow suffocation. The thing about moral courage, and I don't use that phrase lightly, is that it asks you to do the hard thing before you're ready. Not after you've been found out. Not after a doctor's appointment cracks something open. Before. When it still costs you everything, and you do it anyway. I didn't have that at 29. I'm not sure I would have it now if circumstances hadn't forced the issue. That's a hard thing to sit with. But here's what I do know. Lily is going to raise children of her own one day. She is going to have moments in her marriage where the easy thing and the right thing are not the same thing. And what she learned in our house, what she breathed in for 22 years, was that silence is how adults handle pain. I can't take that back. What I can do is show her something different now, even if it's late, even if it's imperfect and awkward and happening in a beige therapist's office on Tuesday afternoons. Resilience isn't starting over clean, it's continuing forward with the full weight of what you've done and not letting that weight be the last word. Gregory is doing that. I am trying to do that. It is not a redemption arc. It's just two tired people deciding that honesty, even now, is worth more than the comfort of keeping quiet. That's the only thing I know for certain. Whatever else I got wrong, I know that much.